Okay, we are live streaming. Let's get started. So, thank everyone for coming out tonight. We would like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. I have received two regrets for this evening, one from Director Goodwin and one from Director El Masri. Can I have a motion on the table to adopt the agenda as presented with a slight amendment to move the audited financial reports to our first item? Motion by Director Abu-Rashid and seconded by Vice Chair Phillips. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, all those in favor, please raise your hands. All those opposed? And any abstentions? As I see none, the motion passes 6-0 to 0. We will now move on to the audited financial reports. I believe we have a representative here. There we go. So I will pass the floor over to you.
Thank you. My name is Matt Beddick. I'm the lead audit partner from KPMG, responsible for the audit of the financial statements of the Wilfrid Laurier Student Union. Just by way of background, I am a Laurier grad myself, albeit it was quite some time ago, but the Students Union was quite active back then, and I'm happy to see it quite active today. I see Chris there in the room. Chris, did you want to make any sort of opening comments, or are you okay if I just sort of run with it?
For those of you that may potentially be on the board next year, don't expect a surplus of this magnitude continuing moving forward. So take it away.
Okay, thanks. I'll share my screen as we go through the financial report. Give me a second to pull that up. Just if somebody want to confirm that you can see the financial statements.
Confirmed.
Excellent. So I'll walk through a couple of the key parts of this document. So the first part is the auditor's report, right? So this is a report that actually comes from KPMG. After this, these are the statements of the student union. So the report, while it's sort of 3 pages long and it's a fairly boilerplate, effectively what it means is it's a clean audit opinion. And what we're saying is, based on the work that we've done, we're comfortable that these financial statements are free of material misstatement, right? So we're not saying that they're necessarily 100% accurate to the penny, but they are sort of can be taken at their word and are a fair representation of the financial position of the student union at April 30th, 2020, as well as your operations for the year. We'll take you down into some of the statements. So here we have the statement of financial position, which outlines the assets and the liabilities of the student union at April 30th, at that one date and time, which is your year end. So a couple of the highlights on here, you'll see there is a significant cash balance, nearly $6 million, up from about $4.1 million last year. That is almost entirely as a result of the significant surplus that was earned this year, and I'll get into that in a couple more minutes. Some of the other highlights on the page, we do see accounts receivable. So these are amounts that you've earned already, but just didn't have the cash at April 30th. So that number is up about 920,000 from 600,000 in the prior year. Significant component of this are some wage subsidies from the government that were still being earned in the latter half of 2022. That again, still hadn't been received yet, but we do see those as having been deposited in the bank after year end. We notice there's also an amount due from the universities at $265,000. Last year, there was actually an amount payable from the student union to the university. This is really just it's what we call a flip account. So it can go into asset or liability, just depending on the timing of payments, usually from the university to the student union based on the fees that they collect on your behalf, as well as some other things that go back and forth between the two entities. The last thing to discuss on here is restricted cash down here at the bottom. So there is cash that's held in a segregated bank account for the purposes of the health and dental plan. Because the health and dental plan sort of increased in its activity and volumes this year, we do see a subsequent increase there as well. Moving on to the liability side of the statement of financial position. So these are amounts that you actually owe as at the end of the year. Not a lot of significant changes here, but I will highlight a couple of things. So accounts payable and accrued liabilities. So these are really just expenses that you incurred in April or March or towards the end of the year, but hadn't paid for them at that point. And you would have paid for them sometime in May or June. This is really just a timing matter, and that balance can fluctuate from period to period. The deferred revenue, the next line item, you see that's up about $400,000 this year. This relates to health and dental fees that have been collected in the year, but for that health plan that still continues on after year end. So the health plan year runs from September 1st to August 31st. So you collected a lot of money in the early part of the year, but you still owe that service to those students for the remaining 4 months of the year. This would be May, June, July, and August. And so that's recorded as deferred revenue. So it's a liability that's owed to them. You'll recognize that as revenue in the next year. Amounts due to campus clubs. Again, these are fees that are collected on behalf of campus clubs but haven't been spent. We did see this continue to climb, through much of the closures. And we would expect that number to start to come down now that the clubs can have more activities and spend more of their money. We do see some long-term debt and some amounts due to the university. These are coming down and coming down nicely overall. And that speaks to the improved financial position of the Students' Union. I think what's important to note here, and I've pointed this out on previous presentations, we often look as an indicator of health, the amount of the liabilities, the current liabilities that the student union has, and compare that to the cash and the current assets that you have. So you see this year it's about 4.2 million. Last year it was almost 5 million for what you owed in the short period of time. I go back up to the previous statement, the current assets being your cash and receivables and what's owed from the university. Again, almost $5 million last year. So it was sort of like a break-even point. But now this year with the assets up at 7.2 million, you've got a significant surplus there. And this is good. For a number of years, the current liabilities exceeded the current assets by a large volume. And that was an indicator of I would say, sort of troubled financial health. But I would say the Students' Union is in a much better financial health today than it was several years ago. If I move into the schedule of operations, so here we have our revenues and our expenses, and in the back schedules, there's some more detail as to where these come from. So I'll flip back into the end of the statements to sort of articulate those so you can see where the money is coming from. So on this statement here, we do show the revenues that have been earned by the functional areas. And we see a couple of places where there's significant increases this year over last. Health and dental, big increase, $1 million, almost a 33% increase this year compared to last year. That's driven by a couple of things. There has been significant growth in enrollment in the plan, I think close to 10% enrollment growth. There's about a 2% inflation factor carried on to that. As well, there was an additional $75 added to the health side of the health and dental this year, which drove that up substantially. We do see some of the expenses going up, but we do see a significant surplus on health and dental this year. We're also seeing increases in WILF's revenue and in food court and similar operations. Again, this is due to the sort of the reestablishment of regular activities on campus. So I flip back up to the main financial statements. That was on page 8, no, page 4. We do see an excess of revenues over expenses this year at about 3.5 million, last year about 2.9 million, so it has improved. That's mostly due to health and dental. and those revenues improving. We're also seeing increases in expenses, as we can see from one year to the next, as we return to sort of full on-campus activities. The other expenses down here, it's sort of the depreciation of your equipment and fixtures and some of the interest on debt. So we're seeing an overall surplus of about 2.9 million compared to 2.3 million last year. So that's a $500,000 growth. As Chris mentioned, this is unusually high and wouldn't expect similar surpluses year on year. I think past this year, we probably expect to see that more look like break even, but really that's up to the board to determine the spending activities on a go-forward basis. So that pretty much sums up my part. I'll turn it back over to the chair or over to Chris to see if there's any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, Director Abu-Rashid.
I have just one quick question. Do you think that it could be a good idea, like going forward, like maybe, sorry, do you think it would be a good idea to like accelerate paying down our debt to increase like future cash flow, or is that not worth it? That's
so we can flip down to the debt schedule, which will provide a bit of context for that question. So one thing you'd want to look at is what interest rates are like on that debt. And so we see we've got a debt at 3%, another one at 3%, another one at sort of 4 and 3.5. So those are fairly good rates. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend an aggressive debt reduction. The other issue that you might run into, and I don't remember the exact terms of these offhand, some of these debts would incur penalties if they were paid off early or paid off more aggressively. So you want to make sure that you weren't incurring excessive additional costs. But to your point, where you can engage in debt reduction, that would certainly be good for the continued financial health. I'd also want to be mindful of what the future activities might be. So if there's a big capital spend on the future, you wouldn't want to use up all your cash paying down your debt only to incur more debt later. And now those debts would be attracting interest rates at sort of 6.5 or 7%.
right.
So because you have very attractive rates right now, you're in good shape, so long as there's not a big capital project that's going to require more debt in the future.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. I have one last question. That would be in regards to fees. So I know, although this may not be like completely within your purview, but I thought it'd be a good idea to ask. Some of our fees are linked to inflation, and then with inflation being so high this year, do you think that we could like freeze those fees for next year? So not raise them by inflation and still run a surplus or break even, or is that kind of out of the question?
Well, there's a lot of parts to that. Obviously, the surplus or break even really is predicated on what the spending levels that go along with it. I do work with a number of organizations that have sort of fees that they charge to members or that they collect from ratepayers. And there is a temptation to sort of temper those fee increases when inflation rates are high. And so yeah, that might make some sense, but I would say over the long period, you'd want to make sure you're at least keeping up with inflation. So, every month the inflation number is a little bit different. We probably see it finishing up the calendar year, probably in the neighborhood of sort of 4.5 to 5%. And so, yeah, you might say, okay, well, we'll temper it a little bit. Maybe we'll keep it at 3.5% this year, but you got to pay for it later. So
right.
Maybe the following year, if inflation drops down to 2%, well, you can't go back to 2, you got to do 3 again, because over the multi-year program, you've got to make sure you keep up, or else you're losing purchasing power and you'll just find yourself back in a period of poor financial health.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, as we have a significant amount of cash sitting, is it just sitting in the equivalent of a checking account, or is it earning any interest?
It's mostly in checking type accounts. Up until very recently, those were almost the best places to put excess cash. But certainly that could be something that the team could look at.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time tonight.
No problem.
Are there any further questions or comments? Phil, go ahead.
What I might suggest is, based on the answer to the question that was just asked, that would be something that I would recommend the board put a pin in their head, not literally, of course, and bring that type of thinking back to the board table when we present next year's operational budget, because it will be this year's board that approves next year's budget, and that's where the potential for freezing or unfreezing fees or capping what inflation might play a role. So good question, but better timed at the end of the year, probably.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good question for the finance committee when we do meet. Any further questions or comments? Okay, as I see none, can I have a motion on the table that the board of directors approve the audited financial report as presented? Motion by Vice Chair Phillips and seconded by Director Leclerc. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? So I see none, we'll move into voting. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? And any abstentions? As I see none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. Thank you very much for your presentation and your time. And I hope you have a good evening.
Thanks. You too. Have a good night.
Take care. Okay, so onwards to the adoption of the consent agenda. These are the monitored reports that were not approved last meeting. Can I have a motion on the table that the board of directors adopts the agenda as presented, the consent agenda as presented? Motion by Vice Chair Phillips and seconded by Director Abu-Rashid. Would you like to speak to your motion? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move into voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? As I see none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. Moving onwards to the comments from the chair of the board and CGO. So I don't have much to report on. The board secretary hiring committee did meet and we did come to a decision. We will get into that later in the meeting. I do think it's good to put a pin in the conversation of hiring our CRO pretty soon because the election is coming up. And yeah, that's all I have on my end. We'll move onward. Oh, are there any questions, any comments, concerns? Okay, so I see now move on to the comments. Oh, Director Brewer should go ahead.
Well, one quick question. Are we going to strike a new committee or are we just going to use the current hiring committee to hire the CRO?
We'll use the committee to hire the CRO, but the one that hired the secretary is a completely different committee. We'll have to strike a new committee to hire the CRO.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So onwards to the comments from the president and CEO. Oh, Phil, go ahead.
Just a quick point of clarification. The chief returning officer this year is going to be the governance coordinator that we've already approved, correct? Okay.
Right. Yes, my apologies.
And then that committee would need to be different because Ian would need to be involved in that hiring process as it's a double report to both the board and to Ian.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. We will cross that bridge when we get there. So onwards to the comments from the president and CEO.
Not too much to report beyond what's already included in the board report. Some big highlights are Health and Wellness Month kicked off today with our pancake breakfast by Food Bank on the Brantford campus to kind of tackle the dimension of food insecurity. But we have over 50 events and workshops being held and coordinated by the Students' Union over the course of November. Other than that, Coffee with the Candidates here on Waterloo had a very solid turnout. The Greek Life MOU has been sent to the Greek Life Council, as I know much of you have been waiting for that one. And that big old sign that we've been waiting for on the front of the FNCC is finally up and running, and it's very bright. You walk outside at night and it lights up the whole walk, kind of.
For safety.
Yeah, that's pretty much all for me.
Are there any questions or comments for the president and CEO? Okay, as I see none, I do have one question. So in terms of the response to the board from the presidential reviews, when can we expect that report to come in?
I will be totally honest with you, completely fell off my radar, and I will tackle that as soon as possible.
Okay, no worries. So moving onwards, we will go to the approval of the meeting minutes from the last couple of meetings. So can I have a motion on the table to the board of directors approve the September 13th, 2022 meeting minutes? Motion by Director Abu-Rashid and seconded by Director Murphy. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none. Oh, Vice Chair Phillips.
Yes, right. I just wanted to check with our secretary here. I know at the last board meeting we talked about doing more of a kind of summary style for the minutes. I imagine these ones are probably completed before we talked about that discussion.
Clarissa, would you like to respond?
Yeah, they were completed before that discussion.
Okay, no worries. I just wanted to make sure, double check. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions or comments? As I see none, we will move into voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? As I see none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. Moving onwards to the September 27th meeting minutes. Can I have a motion on the table that the Board of Directors adopt the September 27th, 2022 meeting minutes? Motion by Director Abu-Rashid and seconded by Vice Chair Phillips. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move into voting. All those in favor? Oh, do you have a comment or is that voting, Vice Chair?
No comment. I'm just voting.
Okay. Okay, all those opposed? And any abstentions? As I see none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. Moving onwards to the Direct Inspection Committee reports. Oh, my deepest apologies to the Executive Director. Mr. Champagne, we'll go to your comments. You can go ahead.
Yeah, I won't take long, I promise. I just want to update the board that official negotiations have begun on both the Student Affairs Advisory Agreement and the Operating Procedures Agreement. And as we kind of go through those agreements and get it to a signing place, the board will be kind of updated and they'll have their opportunity to weigh in on both of those agreements. Just for the record, the Student Affairs basically is the sandbox that exists between Student Affairs, the Students' Union, and the Graduate Students Association in terms of how all things that are considered under the Comprehensive Student Services Fee and how that department is run and money is spent. The Operating Procedures Agreement is essentially the rules of the sandbox for every other department within the university that the Students' Union interacts with, not the least of which and most substantially would be the Facilities Asset Management Group. That conversation literally just started a little over a week ago and will be a little bit longer one because there's going to be some heavy financial conversations with the university as they go through their current budget process and future budget processes, which is my next update. Obviously, the university is dealing with a bit of a shortfall financially, so there are not necessarily hiring freezes per se, but hiring slowdowns to make sure that the most important jobs for the student experience get hired. But the university departments have been asked to model percentages of cuts to their budget in the totals of 1%, 2%, and 3%. So that is possible that the impact on students for the next year will be significant, but we're at the very beginning of that process and won't really know what that looks like. So hopefully there's more to update on that front come the meeting on the 15th of November. Also, the Laurier contract teaching faculty, we're waiting, they have filed a no board report, so we're waiting for the ministry to send back that no board report. Once that no board report is received by that union, there will be a 17-day countdown where that union will then be in a legal position to strike. So that it's entirely possible that there will be a labor movement on Laurier campuses towards the end of the semester. The goal for the Students' Union and the Graduate Students Association is to try to cut through the rhetoric of both sides and try to kind of communicate clearly and effectively with students what the impact will be. But we won't start to do that until that countdown actually hits. They filed for that no board report a little over a week ago, but because of the government unfreezing of wages, there's kind of a backlog of when that's going to come. So we would literally expect that no board report to land imminently. Lastly, just as a point of information, during the December break, the university closes on December 23rd and does not reopen until January 3rd for winter term. First day of classes of winter term is currently scheduled for Monday, January the 9th. And it is our intention to close the student union offices midday on the 22nd of December. And that's it for me.
Okay, Director Abu-Rashid, you can add a question or comment.
Yeah, I have a few questions. I don't know if this will have to be an in-camera discussion, but what do you think that there are what would be some of the improvements that we could make for students in the negotiations? That's my first question.
I mean, mostly students aren't necessarily going to see improvements per se where the operating procedures agreement is concerned. Most of that is kind of back of house type of stuff that most students don't care about. So for example, custodial rates, how to interact and make electrician and trades type of work orders, things of that nature. Included in that are ICT stuff. It's just kind of business as usual type of stuff, where the big concerns are that students will likely not care about, and most people won't care about, is negotiating around the fees of the work that gets done within the Fred Nichols Campus Center and the Student Center in Brantford. So for example, there's a pretty significant project coming up where old boilers are going to have to be removed from the Fred Nichols Campus Center. And there's going to be a bit of a battle with the university to figure out who's responsible for what and for how much. So that'll be a 7-figure project, and I'm sure the university wants us to pay for most of that. I want the university to pay for most of that. They were installed in the 60s before the student union was even really a thing. So anyways, it's that type of stuff. So the OPA stuff will be largely things that students don't notice. The Student Affairs Advisory Agreement, there is a very large potential for the nature of our agreement with the Student Affairs Department to change pretty dramatically, and it's still too early in the infancy to start talking about what that could look like.
Right.
But the hope is that we'll be able to make pretty significant improvements to the resources and the supports that students get, especially during these trying times, all within wellness, athletics, academic supports. For some reason, that department is escaping me. Career and co-op, mostly career, not so much co-op, as well as EDI, et cetera, et cetera. So we're still really early in that process, but the conversations have been very encouraging about how to help maintain and improve access to services during a time where the university is going to be budgeting out cuts.
Right. Okay. Well, more power to you. I wish you great success during those negotiations. My second question lie with the second part of your comments, which was in regards to the potential strike.
Yep.
What will the students' union position be vis-a-vis this topic?
So we don't necessarily have an official position, but we always want to back the student experience. And in this particular case, it would obviously impact the academic side of the house. And our main position is that we hope that the adults in the room on both sides act like adults and get to the table and get a deal done so there's no stoppage in the academic year. And then ultimately our primary goal will be to communicate, as I said, and cut through the rhetoric of both sides and communicate as clearly and effectively as we can so that students understand what their impacts are and how they can kind of navigate the landscape. As of right now, we're optimistic that there won't be a significant work stoppage, but only time will tell.
Okay.
To add to that, my stance on that is just like students just got back in the classroom and we want to prevent them from being out of the classroom.
Yeah.
As much as possible.
A major part of our messaging is that students don't need more hurdles to get through a semester. They've already gone through enough over the last handful of years, so.
I mean, I totally get it. Most of the professors in both of the major like classifications of classes, so like psychology and law society, most of them are contract faculty. So I completely understand that position. I just want to be mindful of the fact that some of the people who might be teaching might have been former Laurier students. So we wouldn't want to be seen as completely backing the university, and we want to kind of avoid the,
So with all due respect,
whereas that's
they're former students, they're not students. Our concern is current students
okay.
who are paying our fees.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Also, we don't tend to take sides. Our side is with the students and they don't necessarily have a stake in this. We just want them to come to an agreement.
Okay. Yeah. Solid. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments for the executive director and COO? Okay, as I see none, we will move on to the direct inspection committee reports. In terms of EL number 2J, hiring practice of unpaid staff, I will move the floor to the chair of that committee, Director Abu Rashid.
Wait, the audio just cut out. I couldn't hear what just was said.
Oh, I'm moving the floor to you to present our findings for the direct
me.
inspection committee report for EL 2J.
Sorry, my apologies. I didn't hear what you said. My apologies.
No
So,
worries.
is it possible for me to share the screen? I'd like to just kind of get ahead of the report. I did use the a previous template for the DIC report, so that I actually noticed two discrepancies. Instead of inputting EL2J, I used the ENDS DIC. So in the summary, you'll see that it's incorrect, and then right next to the chair of the ENDS committee, that's incorrect. I didn't completely correctly put that, so I apologize. I will amend that as soon as possible. I noticed that yesterday. So as when it comes to this report, the membership consisted of the chair and Director Goodwin and myself. We looked at how we could amend and review EL2J. We came with a couple of recommendations. Most of them are just reducing unnecessarily complicated language. So instead of using the word delineate, we looked to change accurately describe, or instead of using publicly discernible identifiable information, we looked at public candidate information. So just simplifying the language that we're using. As for some of the more substantial changes, we're looking to expand the fourth set of rules. So we're looking. It basically says the president will not operate without taking into account previous formal performance appraisals or documented disciplinary action. We included language to say, including ongoing complaints generated by the organization and as well as a relevant university partner. So we just added a little bit more scope to that. If there are any questions, as I've spoken with the chair, I'd be more than happy to speak about that in camera, as this is a little bit of a sensitive matter. As for other stuff, we're looking at making the policy a little bit more wholesome. We want our students to not only benefit from the services, but also grow professionally. That was the opinion of the committee. So we're looking to also give the opportunity for students to not only get feedback during the hiring process, but also coaching. So that would include a little bit more on the how they could succeed in future competitions. We want students to be successful, and if they're not successful now, give them the chance to be successful in the future. And lastly, we just split the sixth word is escaping me. The sixth requirement into two. It was the language was a little bit unclear or confusing. So it used to read as allow applicants to be unaware of this policy or to provide a way to be heard for persons who believe that they have not been accorded a reasonable interpretation of their rights under this policy. We're just looking to split that, make it more clear. So we're just saying allow applicants to be unaware of this policy and shall provide a way to be heard for students. Just clarifying that. Those are the changes that we are recommending for EL2J, and I'd be more than happy to get any questions regarding this. Please go ahead. The president or the CO, up to you.
Could you elaborate a little bit on what the idea of personalized feedback and coaching entails to applicants?
So I'm looking at this from the perspective my professional experience. Working in the government, feedback typically refers to, or it used to be defined as getting feedback on how they did in the interview. The coaching part would be how to take that information and develop further. So the suggestion is to just kind of expand or make it a little bit more wholesome. I hope that kind of explains. We want students to be given the opportunity to get advice on how to develop in the future.
Yeah.
The vice chair, if you'd like.
I believe it was Ian first. You can go ahead.
Oh, okay, Ian, yes, please.
Yeah, it's just a recommendation in the newly created 0.7 to change shall to fail to, just given that the way the policy instructions are offered in the negative. So it will be the president will not fail to provide a way to be heard rather than the president will not shall provide. So just
my apologies. I will fix that language, or we can motion it. Can we motion that? Is that something we can motion? Ian, can we motion on this, or do I have to?
Yeah, you could. I mean, we haven't. Once we've kind of finalized discussion, you could offer up a motion with the necessary amendments to any language that's been altered, including that point.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The vice chair.
No comments from me.
Phil, I thought you had a question.
No, you did. I'm struggling with the coaching bit. I totally understand what you're trying to get at there. And in certain circumstances, that's a totally reasonable request to make. For some reason, my brain gets stuck when we kind of do mass hiring. So for example, when we do icebreakers, the ability to carve out time at that time of the year to provide personalized coaching to each unsuccessful applicant could become problematic. And then just by sheer volume and timing, they become non-compliant with that particular policy.
I have a suggestion. Do you think that maybe we can add like a stipulation when operationally feasible? Would that appeal?
That's totally reasonable. Yeah.
Because like obviously like if you can't get back to the student within like 2-3 weeks, you could like notify the student and let them know we'll give you the feedback, just not this minute. Because obviously we want to be considerate of the fact that operations already has a big workload, and we don't want to encumber the president's limited resources. So I'm completely amenable to like adding language to operationally feasible and with an extended timeline, or something to kind of give the like extra time during the crunch periods.
We definitely already try to do all of that.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that language would be better, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Are there any other questions in relations to the DIC? As I see none, Frankie, can I motion with the added amendments?
Yes, you can.
Okay, so I will, do I ask for a motion or do I motion myself?
Just motion yourself.
Okay, so I will motion that the board adopt the recommendations to amend EL2J with the included amendments of changing shall to will not. What was it?
Fail to.
Fail to, and then, so that's the first part, and then the second amendment would be for point number 5, which is to add the language of when operationally feasible and with notifying the applicant of a delay in a timely manner. In a delay of getting feedback in a timely manner. Does that kind of make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Have a seconder. Vice Chair Phillips. Would either of you like to speak to your motions?
Yes,
Vice
please.
Chair?
For the sake of like policy succinctness, if that's a word, should it just be when operationally feasible? I feel like I'm concerned that we might get too dense in there. I don't know. Thoughts, Ian or Phil?
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you include when operationally feasible, properly captures the intent personally.
Okay, perfect. So
Can I just
go
a
ahead.
motion? Sorry, Frankie.
I can re-motion if you'd like. Sorry, there's a lag in the internet between you and I, so I apologize if I'm cutting you off.
Go ahead, just re-motion.
So can I re-motion, Chair? Okay, so I will motion that the board adopt the recommendations from the DIC report on EL2J with the following amendments in relation to number 5 to add to make it so operate without providing access to personalized feedback and coaching to applicants that will assist them in future applications when operationally feasible, and changing the language from shall on line number 7 to fail to.
Okay. Do I have a seconder? Vice Chair Phillips. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move into the voting process. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, as I see none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. We'll move onwards to GP2F. So let me share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see that? Perfect. So because Director Al-Masri is not here, I will be delivering this statement. So the NDIC, sorry, I believe there's a mistake in here. Should not be NDIC, should be GP2FDIC. So we'll amend that. The GP2FDIC was struck on October 27th, 2022, with the mandate to review and assess GP2F. The committee ensures that the evidence presented was appropriate and up to date, the wording of the policy is sound, and that the scope of the organization is captured in the policy. Membership of the committee consisted of Board Chair Daljudice, Vice Chair Phillips, and Director Al-Masri, and Director Murphy. All members were in attendance except for Director Murphy, who was absent with regrets. For the GP2FDIC, the committee had discussions on the following items prior to making their decisions: if the wording of the policy was still relevant to the organization, if the scope of the organization was captured in the policy, how recent the policy was looked at and revised, if the scope of the organization was captured in the policy. The final decision of the committee consists of 0 recommendations to the policy at hand. Are there any questions or comments about this report? Okay, as I see none, can I have a motion on the table to adopt the Direct Inspection Committee report as presented? Motioned by Vice Chair Phillips and seconded by Director Abu Rashid. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move into the voting process. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, as I see none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. We will move onwards to the blood donation initiative. So we have had discussions in the past about donating blood as a board. I personally think this is a great idea. Both the Brantford and the Waterloo campus has the opportunity to, I believe it's a full-time opportunity to donate blood whenever possible for you. I will just read off of the Laurier website as to when and where it is available. So in Waterloo, the Canadian Blood Services Clinic is located at 94 Bridgeport Road East. And you have to book an appointment for Monday through Thursday from either 2 p.m. to 7 p.m., Friday, 8 a.m. to noon, Saturday, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. And in Brantford, there are mobile clinics, which I don't believe there are any coming up soon. However, if the Brantford director would like to come to Waterloo to donate blood, we'd greatly appreciate it. I believe this is a great opportunity to show face and show that we do care about donating blood, and it's a great cause. So is everybody on board for this? Director Boucher?
I do have just a more like a comment. Can we make this like a bigger SU thing? Would the president be interested to coming with his staff? Just the CO, please. Go ahead.
So we're already going to mention that we have a staff meeting tomorrow morning, and we're going to talk about that at that meeting. So it is our intention to try to generate a lot of traffic from the staff. Yes.
Perfect. I think it would be like super fun if we could maybe like do some like social media posts and like get some Brantford students to come. I know of a few handful that would be interested in coming. So I think it would be a really fun thing to have like the board, the president, some of his staff to come go, and then encourage some students to come along with us. I think that'd be a great experience. If there is any need to kind of coordinate with Canadian Blood Services, they do like to know ahead of time when groups are going. I'd be more than happy to use some of my previous connections with Canadian Blood Services to facilitate that event happening.
Okay, sounds good. Now, in terms of when we could all go as a group, I think this will be a bit more difficult to coordinate with operations and with the president because we're all separate groups, and just coordinating that would be pretty difficult. So do we want to go as a board, or do we want to go as an organization with a bunch of other stakeholders and parties? Vice Chair?
I mean, obviously, depending on operations perspective on this, I feel like since they're more moving part for them to keep track of, it might make more sense for, if that is something they're interested in doing, that to be scheduled by them and then joined by the board members.
Yep, that's a great option. Are there any other options that we would like to throw out there?
I agree with the vice chair. If the operations team wants to take the lead, and then we'll just tack on, I think that actually could be the simplest solution for all. I know the president and his staff are very busy, so we'll work around them.
Yep, absolutely. So that's a great idea. If we can have notice when this appointment does happen, that'd be great to know. So onwards to our next agenda item. First of all, are there any questions or comments relating to this discussion item at all? Okay, moving onwards to the board secretary hiring committee update. This won't take very long. We met briefly last week and we decided that we would hire the next runner-up to complete the remaining minutes. If this person is not available, we decided that we would go down the list of preferred candidates. Unless it was a candidate who we absolutely said, no, this is not a good candidate at all. In the event that does happen, we suggested that we reopen the hiring processes for the secretary, but that is only if that does happen. Are there any questions or comments for me? Bill?
Like, we don't, like, operationally, we don't really have access to that information of who those folks are. Are you going to be reaching out to them, or you want us to do that?
I'll reach out to them personally.
Okay, so before you do that, we should probably circle back and talk about what remuneration looks like for that person.
Okay.
Okay.
Um,
We can theoretically talk about that now if you want.
Sure, why not? Director Abu should go ahead.
I think it would be actually a great idea if we did talk about it today, despite it not being on the agenda. I think that it would be extremely fair to offer the same compensation that we do for our the board's permanent secretary based on the workload that they would have. Phil, do you think it would be better to do like a flexible contract where it'd be like kind of have like a target and then like kind of hire them on the hour, or we would be doing like a fixed contract and then paid per hour at the same rate?
Well, if we want the same style of minutes that we currently are looking for, so just basically motions and votes and things of that nature, most of those, I always forget how long that list is, so thanks for that, Ian. Yeah, my original thought was yes, it feels like it would be a similar to a term. How many are actually there, Ian? So it looks like more than a semester, so maybe more than a semester, is that, I don't know. I'm open to suggestion.
I think it's also important that we, like, if we do decide with like a fixed contract, so we pay set amount of hours for a set amount of money per hour, I think we should be, I don't want to say like generous, but to be reasonable, especially considering that all of these minutes are in camera meeting minutes, so sensitive items will have been discussed.
So the board secretary is not paid by the hour, they're paid an honorarium. So it would be kind of a flat fee. And so typically during a semester, there's 12 weeks of class, which means there's usually about 6 meetings per term. And you're looking at, I mean, some of those in-camera meetings are not particularly long, but you're looking at 13 sets of minutes, which is essentially a full academic year, minus spring, summer type of concept. So I would maybe negotiate like just because I'm cheap, a 3/4 of 2 terms or up to 2 terms. I mean, they can always come back at us and ask for more or less, which would be nice. Donation to Shine Around what?
I mean, I think if we offered up like 3/4 of 2 terms and then give the president budget for up to 2 terms, I think that would be a reasonable motion to make.
So do we need a hard number by tonight, or can we just say we can pay them by the 3/4 of 2 academic terms?
So if you vote for 3/4 up to a full of 2 terms, then we can kind of figure out what that number is and update the board at the next meeting.
Okay, so can I have a motion on the table that the honorarium for the new secretary who will complete the outstanding minutes be calculated at 3/4 of 2 terms. Is that correct? Or 2 academic terms? Perfect. So the motion by Director Abu Rashid and seconded by Vice Chair Phillips. Would you like to speak to your motions?
Yeah, can we maybe add language up to 2 terms if the compensation is not competitive enough, just to give flexibility for operations?
Sure. So new motion on the table to adopt a new paradigm of paying the honorarium for the new secretary to complete outstanding minutes at 3/4 of 2 academic terms, and going up to 2 terms if necessary. So motion by Director Abu Rashid and seconded by Director Bottinger. Would you like to speak to your motions?
No.
Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move into voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, as I see none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. Okay, so new business and announcements. What's going on in your lives?
Wait, I have a question. Did we not, are we not going to discuss the briefing note for the Brantford director?
Is that on the agenda?
We received the briefing note earlier today.
We can add it to other business,
Oh, okay.
Okay,
which is this, right? Are we another?
yeah, so we can definitely talk about that. So just let me pull this up.
I can give it a, while you pull it up, I can give a basic brief summary of it.
Sure.
Both Ian and I have kind of read policy and interpreted that quorum is quorum regardless, because a director based in the Brantford campus is still representing all Laurier students. So full quorum would likely be required. And it would be our recommendation to limp out the term and tack on a special election to the general election at the end of January, under the caveat that that candidate would start immediately after being elected and then become a member, functioning member of the board. Because basically we've got 2 meetings left before the term is over. We would almost assuredly not complete a by-election by that point, and before you know it, it'll be the regular election. So no sense in running 2 elections so close together. There's also then the possibility with the new ONCA legislation that the board can kind of change the way a special by-election would be required, and do it in a similar way to in the future to what we do with the Senate and Board of Governors, where the next runner-up would be approached, and if they're willing, they could fill the seat, et cetera, et cetera. We can't do that now based on our policies, but we could change our policies as we're going to become compliant with the new ONCA legislation.
Sorry, just to clarify that, we could do the next runner-up, but we can't just appoint a director. And the problem in this instance is there is no runner-up from the last election. So this would be giving the board the ability to appoint a director to fill a vacancy, which the new Not-for-Profit Corporations Act explicitly permits. So we wouldn't be going against any legislative directive. We would actually be better aligning the power of the directors with what the new legislation outlines. So it's just another option for the board to consider.
Director Abu Rashid?
I think that the policy, the recommendation brought forward by the COO and the Director of Policy Research and Advocacy was a great one, and I fully support it as a Brantford director. I think if we could tack on that special election in January to appoint a Brantford director soon, that would be great, and especially considering that we're 2 meetings away from the end of the term anyway. I think that would be great. So yeah, if anything, I'm ready to motion to accept the policy, the recommendation brought forward by operations.
Okay. So I see a motion on the table by Director Baruchid to adopt the recommendations presented by our full-time staff. Can I have a seconder? And that would be Vice Chair Phillips. Would you like to speak to your motions? Ian, go ahead.
Yeah, so the potential referendum question would still come back to the board at the end of the month for your approval. So you're not approving the referendum question yet. You're kind of giving us the direction to present it to you, but there would be a subsequent meeting where you'd be able to see the text of the proposed referendum question and then vote to approve or not approve that question.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Director Baruchid.
I just want to say a special thank you for both of the directors for their work on this. I know that it really was a lot in such a short period of time, and I appreciate their dedication.
Absolutely, I echo those comments. So any further discussion on the matter? Okay, as I see none, we'll move into voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, so I see none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. Any other new business or announcements? Phil,
The Laurier men's football team will be competing in the playoffs against Western in London this coming Saturday. Shane, in partnership, the Students' Union, in partnership with Athletics and Recreation and the Student Affairs Office, will be selling very affordable tickets for a bus down to London to go support the team. Hopefully those go on sale as early as tomorrow, but keep an eye out and
Support.
hopefully we don't get curb stopped.
hopefully the game goes as well as it did last week. Director Baruchid.
As we read in the board report, I'm some of the new upcoming activities that the president is running. I'm really excited. Personally, I'm really excited for the Tinder Tales. I recall it actually being the first student union activity that got me into the student union in in a fall of 2019. So I with great anticipation, I look forward to the event, and I know it's going to be an amazing show. So thank you.
Great to hear.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. As I see none, we'll move into adjournment. Can I have a motion on the table that the board adjourn the November 1st, 2022 meeting? Motion by Director Murphy and seconded by Vice Chair Phillips. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move to voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes with unanimous consent.